Well, theology in the old sense is talking about God. In fact, theology has always been thought of somewhat like a science. In fact, in the old days, it was considered the queen of the sciences. But more generally, it's the process of looking at religious experience, stepping back from it, asking what makes it possible, what makes it transformative, what makes it destructive. Theology in a secular age begins in a somewhat different way. In the old days, theology was based on a divine revelation from God. But in a secular age, at least as Charles Taylor defines it in his magnum opus book titled A Secular Age, it's simply the recognition that in the modern age, people have options to believe or not to believe in this faith or that faith, to move from one faith to another. So it's not the absence of belief in God or in religion or in faith, but it's the presence of many different options for believing and for thinking about life and its meaning. My approach to the UU University course on Theology in a Secular Age has focused on 7 fundamental questions that are questions that theology asks about religious experience and about what makes it possible. We begin with the question of how we know what we most truly know. This is the question of revelation and knowledge, and whether revelation comes to us from on high, and so gives us our own unique private set of facts, or whether knowledge is something that is publicly held and there is only one set of facts. The question is this: what you most truly know, your deepest conviction about what is true, what is real, where does that come from? And why do you know that it's true? What source or form of knowledge gives you the most confidence? The Huffington Post? A telescope? Oprah? A 3,000-year-old book? How did you come to know whatever it is that you are most certain of? There are basically 2 possible answers to the question. One is that something is true because God said it's true. God said it, inspired it, authorized it, and therefore I can have complete confidence in it because God said it. The other set of answers looks not upward but outward. I know something is true because I have evidence or know there to be evidence or can demonstrate or prove that it is true. The baseline question here is very simple. Is our experience trustworthy? Can you trust your experience of the world to be a true source of knowledge? The 4th century church father, St. Augustine, said famously, "I believe, therefore I understand." Children of the Enlightenment move in the other direction, not from belief to understanding, but rather from understanding to belief. We take everything we know into account before we decide what to believe. Enlightened faith never asks us to set aside what we know. This freedom from these doctrinal shackles, we owe this to an awakening known as the Renaissance, and ironically enough, to a monk named Martin Luther. In 1517, when Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses on the door of the church in Wittenberg, he sparked a revolution and a cataclysm the likes of which he could not have imagined. And he did something very simple but very far-reaching. The church had insisted for centuries that it was central to salvation, that the revelation of God could only be interpreted and read by the priests, that the institution of the church was necessary for salvation, the sacraments, penance, confession, and that the only way an individual could reach God was through the mediating power of the church. Luther, in one fell swoop, completely took the church out of the picture. He said that salvation is a matter of God's Spirit reaching down to an individual who responds in faith to God's act of grace. And the church had nothing to do with that act of grace and salvation. No confession to the priest was necessary, no sacraments, no indulgence, no penance. Some of these elements had a place in the life of faith, but they weren't necessary for salvation. At the time, Luther had no idea, neither did any of the other Renaissance thinkers, what they were unleashing with this focus on the power of the individual to think and to reason and to decide. But there was no going back. And as the centuries developed, the rise of modern science has continued to change the rules under which religion operates. In the old days, the belief in divine revelation meant that every religion had its own set of facts, miraculously delivered from God on high. With the spread of enlightened views of knowledge, thoughtful people came to understand there are only one set of facts. 2 + 2 = 4. The universe is about 15 billion years old. Sexual preference is mostly about physiology. In the modern world, none of us is entitled to our own set of facts. But facts can be used for many different things and deployed for many different purposes. The main function of religious faith is not to affirm that certain facts are true. Rather, it is to develop a life of meaning and purpose in light of those facts. In so doing, faith animates our conduct and transforms our character. Our commitment to religious pluralism, by the way, stems not from our readiness to let each religion have its own set of facts, but rather from our awareness that a diversity of purposes can arise from one body of knowledge. The quintessential story of revelation, of knowledge in the old sense, is the story of the Ten Commandments. You remember that story? As told in the Hebrew Bible, the people of Israel had been liberated from slavery in Egypt, had trudged across the desert, and Moses had led them toward the mountain of Sinai. 3 months after they left Egypt, they pitched their tents in the shadow of Sinai. And according to the story, Moses said to the people, "Ready yourselves for 3 days." The story continues as follows. "And it happened on the 3rd day, as it turned toward morning, that there was thunder and lightning and a heavy cloud on the mountain, and the sound of the ram's horn very strong, and all the people who were in the camp trembled. And Moses brought out the people toward God from the camp, and they stationed themselves at the bottom of the mountain. And Mount Sinai was all in smoke, because the Lord had come down on it in fire. And its smoke went up like the smoke from a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. And the Lord came down on Mount Sinai to the mountaintop, and the Lord called Moses up to the mountaintop, and Moses went up. And God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slaves. You shall have no other gods before me." The rest of the commandments follow. Don't worship idols or take God's name in vain. Remember the Sabbath, honor your parents, don't murder, commit adultery, steal, lie, or covet. That's it. 10 Commandments. When carved into stone, they became a visible symbol of the covenant and an enduring source of ethical guidance. Now, as a first draft of rules for living, the 10 Commandments are quite good. What's not to like? In fact, people who object to the 10 Commandments today do not object because they are in favor of murder, adultery, and stealing. Rather, they object to the idea that the sole source of ultimate truth is the God of fire and smoke on Sinai. But instead of focusing on God, I want to focus just for a moment on the fireworks. According to the story, the people of Israel accepted the commandments as authentic because they were validated by the forces of nature. We look for truth in the nature of the world we live in.